Migrants deported to France under Britain's shiny new one-in, one-out deal just simply rode straight back to Britain.
Really, the only logical way to approach this issue is to just get in there and say, all right, we're closing the lid.
America's having success when it comes to shutting crossings off at the border, but when it comes to mass deportation, right now what's going on is a little bit of book cooking.
Migrants deported to France under Britain's shiny new one-in, one-out deal just simply rode straight back to Britain after being deported. Deputy Prime Minister David Lammy insists it's proof the system is working. Because if working in that way clearly means a different word to him. This crackdown has been much heralded by Prime Minister Keir Starmer as his fix for illegal migration, in the fact that one person crossing the sea on boats lands in Britain and is deported back in return for one legal migrant who is allowed to settle here. Complicated? Yes. Working? Clearly not. We're going to be joined by Hauman from the Heritage Foundation shortly. But Tim and Rebekah are here with me in the studio. Look, I've just tried to explain that in the simplest way I possibly could. Record numbers of illegal migrants are crossing the Channel in Britain. 53,000, I think it is, this year. In the U.S., Donald Trump was elected at a similar time to Keir Starmer. Crossings on the southern border, 0. Tim, I mean, from where you're sitting, what is Donald Trump getting right and what is the rest of the world seemingly incapable of doing? What's the magic sauce?
I'm so glad you asked this, because this is one of my favorite things to talk about. The magic sauce is that Donald Trump has just cut through all the nonsense, cut through all the policy talk and the, different calculations and the trade-offs, and he just said, I want no border crossings. Do whatever needs to do it. Done. Get him out of here. He probably said that exactly, right? Get him out of here. So deportations and increased border security. We just reported today that there was an illegal immigrant who was implicated in the murder of a Texas woman. It was revealed that the immigrant came through using the CBP-1 app, right? This is the app under the Biden administration that said people are going to come in illegally one way or the other. Let's give them this app and let's just do it so it's legal, but it's quick. That seems to me to be what the UK's policy is, something like that, right? We can't necessarily stop it, so let's try to manage it or let's try to strike some sort of balance with it. The second you get into those trade-offs, it's really you give them an inch, they'll take a mile, right? That's what's happening. Exactly.
Rebekah, I mean, it is a slightly... I'm going to try one more time to explain this properly. So people cross the Channel from France, illegal migrants. They have no right to claim asylum in the UK. They are then sent back to France. In return, France gives Britain one person who can claim legal asylum, one in, one out. It hasn't really worked so far. But as Tim says, this sort of tinkering is rendered entirely pointless when, the guy gets deported back to France and he's back in Britain by breakfast time, having just got straight back on the small boat, right? It's baffling.
Yeah, I mean, it's pointless. It's overly complicated. I think that the approach that President Trump has taken, which, as Tim said, is just no nonsense. I think that there's still a lot of other countries in the West that are obviously dealing with this problem of mass migration. But the problem is that they're still trying to approach it with this empathetic worldview, where they're sort of trying to overcomplicate the legal system to sort of let some people in, but maybe politely decline others. And it's just, as you said, it's just totally ineffective. Really, the only logical way to approach this issue is to just get in there and say, all right, we're closing the lid.
Well, I mean, it's not just Britain, it's not just America. In Ireland, they're literally rioting on the streets after, as you say, sort of criminal attacks by migrants on the local population. This is a tinderbox. And it strikes me that maybe the president is the exception here. But other governments across the West seem to be spectacularly out of kilter with where the public anger is on this one, and don't seem to have realised that the populations have moved on so much further than where the politicians are.
I think that's right. I think there's this sense among the kind of global political class, to use a phrase, that the people are wrong, right? The people are just a little bit too, they're a little
the
bit
voters
too,
are wrong.
The
If
voters are wrong.
They were taught about the great,
they're a little bit, they're too heartless.
Yeah.
They're thinking too parochially. They're not seeing the big picture. And of course, the big picture is that we're seeing the big picture. The big picture is not a pretty picture. I also think that people that look. most people that get elected to governments are some sort of do-gooder, right? They want to make some
Everyone
sort of change.
I like to think everyone wants to help the world, right?
Especially if you get elected to public office, you want to help people who are less fortunate than you, right? 15, 20 years ago, we in the West used to do that by spreading democracy and toppling dictators. You're not allowed to do that anymore. That's not fashionable anymore. Yeah. So instead of improving these other countries, what do? Well, we have to let them into our countries. And this is something that President Trump, I think you're right, he was the outlier. He was not afraid to say, it's bad in these countries, but he also said, we're not going in there and we're not letting their people in here.
Tim, hold that thought. I think we've got RJ Hauman tonight with us. Down the line, there he is. Welcome back to Save the West. I know you've had a little bit of difficulty there, but we've got you now from the Heritage Foundation, RJ Hauman. We were just discussing there, I don't know if you heard there, RJ, just quite how out of touch it seems vast swathes of Western politicians are with the anger, the boiling anger of their populations. And that disconnect is fundamentally quite dangerous, right?
No, I mean, I saw it again when I was across the pond and debating in Oxford and everything. You had a lot of, again, like cab drivers and everything that were afraid to even make their voice heard when they did, at the polling booth and everything. But what we're seeing, I'm seeing it on two fronts here. After President Trump won on a clear mass deportation mandate of about 75 million Americans clearly voted for the enforcement of our immigration laws. And now suddenly we're pivoting to, okay, it's the worst of the worst. I mean, you had that gentleman sing, the second driver, who kills 3 Americans. Now, is he suddenly the worst of the worst? Now he's eligible for deportation? You shouldn't need to see blood on the pavement before you deport somebody after 75 million Americans make their voice heard. And then second, you're seeing it on the H-1B stuff too, the guest worker visas. They're temporary in nature, but they're permanent, okay? When I led this group of college Republicans about 5 years ago in COVID, we had the same ask essentially as the strongest bill we're seeing on Capitol Hill. Okay, it was like pause H-1B. You kind of do a small reform, and then you end STEM OPT. Trump's doing these fees and everything. It doesn't do jack shit. Okay, I'll be honest with you. I'll be blunt. We're past the watershed. It's fine. Just isn't there. So it's frustrating. The American people made their voice clear. We got to adhere to it, or we're going to pay in the midterms, and then our consultant class is going to say it was for the wrong reason. When we didn't deliver, not because we did something that they view as controversial.
But President Trump is delivering record. Border crossings are the lowest since the 1970s. Catch and release, where people are sort of cross illegally, of ground to a halt. There is, it seems to me that America is actually having some success here when you compare it to perhaps UK and
America's having success when it comes to shutting crossings off at the border. But when it comes to mass deportation, right now what's going on is a little bit of book cooking, okay? The self-deportation numbers that we're seeing, they're trying to pay people to use an app and stuff. They're counting, Coast Guard arrests on the ocean. Excuse me, sorry about that.
That's all right.
On the ocean.
I mean, it all happens here. That's not even the first time
I'm in the airport. I'm sorry. But no, listen, they're kind of cooking the books a little bit, not in adherence to the election. So,
RJ Hauman, you stay there. You sort your shot out, and I'll come back.
I got to get speak.
I mean, that's not even the first time that's happened on this show. Rebekah, we haven't heard from you for a while. What I think, the point Tim was making there before, I think he either fell over or his phone fell over, was that actually, illegal migrations crossing. Oh, I got the giggles now. Illegal migrations crossing on the southern border are one thing, but again, the other great elephant in the room is the massive amounts of legal migration that far dwarf any illegal crossings.
Yeah, I just think that there's increasingly not an appetite for this sort of thing, not just in the United States, but all across the West. I mean, we've seen protests become increasingly popular where you're protesting not just illegal migration, mass migration in general, demographic changes that are just too abrupt for certain, neighborhoods to sustain. And I think that's becoming increasingly a problem that they can't ignore. You said these elected officials that they feel that they might know better than the voters or than their constituents, but in reality, they're not the ones living in neighborhoods where they are actually impacted by the problem.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's all very easy for politicians to lecture from their ivory towers, especially when they've made lots of money out of their, being in politics itself. One of the things that happened in this country, in America, is that, there was a populist uprising against the political class. We were talking earlier about where this generation of politicians that talk about sound money and things like that gone. Well, they were swept away on this MAGA wave. Rebekah, do you think it's time for MAGA to be sort of exported around the world? Is it time to show best practice on that and send it over to Britain?
I think it's already happening. I mean, maybe not so much in the tangible
hats,
political sense,
yeah.
but culturally, definitely in the grassroots, you're seeing an uprising where they're not just rejecting mass migration, but just a general populist sentiment is becoming increasingly popular. And I think it's just about time that we're going to see something resembling the MAGA movement in other Western countries.
Yeah, Tim, do you think it's time for Europe's MAGA moment? I mean, the problem in mainland Europe, I think, is actually the far right is far more organised than it is in Britain. Britain is kind of blessed, actually, in the fact that the far right and the far left are basically clowns on both sides. And actually, Nigel Farage is, he is of the right, but he is, there is a fringe of extreme right wingery beyond him. Whereas in Europe, it strikes me as the far right is a little bit more mainstream. Is that fair, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fair. And so I do think I want to be very careful when I say this. I think, yes, it's time for Europe to have its own sort of MAGA movement. And by that, I mean literally taking the expression of American conservatism as espoused by Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans and applying that to their countries. Not necessarily, not make England great again. Maybe
make America great Britain again, I think.
I just, whenever European conservatives start getting riled up, I start thinking about, parades in the street and thrones and altars and things like that. So maybe just keeping a different type of conservatism in mind.
But, I mean, populism. What it comes down to is, though, that unless politicians of all stripes and of all countries wake up to what is happening, wake up to that, not even that silent majority anymore. People are, they're making their voices heard. If they don't wake up to it, they deserve to be swept out of office, right?
Of course they do. I think it's just a matter of who's going to come after them, right? That was the key, and this was, if you remember, almost 10 years ago now, right? Maybe less than that. 2 years into the first Trump administration, who's going to pick up the MAGA mantle? It's nothing. The Republican Party's done. It's over. Trump doesn't have beliefs. There's no such thing as Trump Republicans. This has been proved incredibly not true. I mean, you mentioned Vice President Vance and Secretary Rubio. To say nothing of all the younger people that are coming up through Congress and local governments, right? So, I mean, we were lucky on the one hand. Of course, this was an effort on, the part of certain individuals and groups, but I'm not familiar necessarily with what's happening in mainland Europe. But if there is a backbench of people waiting to sweep in, and if not, it's just the next Keir Starmer, right? It's the next whoever. Yeah,
I mean, Rebekah, that's what worries me. I mean, we talk about Donald Trump having success, but if these voters, so say Britain elects Nigel Farage. He sweeps in. He's obviously close to Donald Trump. He's obviously learning at his side. He's learning, trying to import to the United Kingdom a lot of that MAGA vibe. What happens, though, worries me, is what happens if they hit the same stumbling blocks. They hit the same legal roadblocks. They hit the same conventions and UN charters and Strasbourg courts and rights. It comes a point where actually it's the system that's cracked, right?
Yeah, I think, the rest of the world, no offense, is sort of downstream of the United States, at least politically. I think that's a fair thing to say. And so if we do see somebody like Nigel Farage come into power, I think there's going to be a lot of similarities to sort of what we had seen in the last decade or so take place under President Donald Trump's leadership. And so, but yeah, to Tim's point, I really just do think that it's going to be a matter of listening to your voters.
Yeah.
Novel idea, listening to your constituents. Right? Perhaps if there are these mass protests, maybe you should listen, or at least try to understand and see where the majority of your population is coming from. Just a suggestion.
At their peril, indeed. I think, sadly, guys, we have lost R.J. Hauman tonight. I think he may. I don't know what airport he's stuck in, but I suspect he might be staying there for a little while without any phone signal. I hope there's a bar. I suspect there may have been. Guys, fascinating chat tonight. I mean, we again covered a lot of ground. Come back and see us again soon. Tim Rice from, I gotta get it right, Signal, Daily Caller, Daily Wire.
There it is. Harry.
Third time's the charm.
Third time's a charm. Plays much easier, Dave. Thank you both for joining us tonight.